So now I'd like to introduce three members of our EPI committee. First, Mike Fury, then Barrett Fisher, the President and CEO of Tourism Whistler, and Councillor Jason Faulkner, who will be making presentations tonight on behalf of the Economic Partnership Initiative. So, Mike, take her away.
Thank you, Councillor Crompton, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to echo the Mayor's comments. I know everyone has lots on this time of year, and there's lots of other things to do, and appreciate you taking the time away from your family and coming out to hear about the Economic Partnership Initiative, which I'll refer to as EPI, but also to take part of our important budget meeting. Really, the EPI presentation could be done on its own, but we really wanted to take advantage of this evening to present it in the context of the budget because it provides a great backdrop. A lot of the work we do on the budget is really getting down into gravel and looking at the specifics of our financial plan, which is what we need to do. But I also think it's important to sort of step back from that and look at, well, what are the overall drivers of the economic drivers of the community? How are we doing? What's the data that we collect showing us in terms of the trends in the resort? So that's what we're going to run through. I'm going to try and be really quick. Barrett Fisher is going to follow me after I do a number of slides here. What you're going to hear as I go through my presentation and Barrett does hers, there's some really good trends happening in the resort. Things are going really well in a lot of sectors. At the same time, there's some areas that we need to look very closely at and be cognizant of as we develop and look at some economic planning going forward. So really we're not here to present any conclusions tonight. We're really just to share where we are. As we all know, the resort economy here and the resort economies that we compete with are all evolving, and we want to stay ahead of that curve, and part of that thinking is driving us to look at the economic planning exercise. Finally, I just wanted to say before I jump into the presentation that I am, as Councillor Crompton said, presenting on behalf of the EPI committee, who I'll introduce in a minute. Any mistakes or errors are mine, but the good part is from them. So first of all, early in 2012, as the Mayor referenced, we came up with our Council Action Plan, and part of that they identified resort economic planning as a priority. Over the last 12 months or so, we spent a lot of time getting our house in order fiscally, internally, and doing a lot of work on accountability in other areas. We've made a lot of headway on that and now have sort of turned our mind to the exercise of economic planning. Council has very strongly endorsed this approach and very strongly endorsed a collaborative approach to the economic planning exercise. And it also very much directs us towards a evidence-based policy development. And what that is looking at a data analysis and supporting our ideas and recommendations with sound information. Got a lot of things to juggle up here and not a lot of room. So a quick overview of what we're going to present, which I've alluded to earlier. We know that the success of this exercise really hinges on getting your participation. So we wanted to come out early. Don't really have, as I said, don't have deductions made or are not going to share sort of conclusions in terms of what the findings will tell us, just sharing the information we've found to date. So it's early days, but we want to get the community involved. And we also want to provide an opportunity for you to feedback, and we'll do that at the round tables and also at a Q&A at the end of the evening. So to introduce our Economic Partnership Initiative Committee members, and I'll ask the members to stand up. I know there's a number of them here as I run through it. Starting off with the Hotel Association of Whistler, Jim Douglas, followed by Tourism Whistler, Barrett Fisher. Whistler Blackcomb is represented by Dave Brownlee, who I know is not here yet. Whistler Chamber of Commerce, Fiona Famulak. Member at Large, Daniel Chris Manson. Danielle represents, she's the community member who was selected by council, and she's the person, if you see out around, you want to get and talk to her and interrupt her while she's at Nestor's and other places. She really wants to hear from you. And we have Council Member Jason Faulkner, who's going to be up here in a moment, and Jan Janssen, it's in the back there, and myself. I also want to note and ask him to stand up, Ted Battison, who is the project manager from RMOW. And yes, Ted actually deserves a round of applause because he does all the work. So what are the goals of the EPI? Really pretty straightforward: grow the resort economy, build confidence in the resort community, and attract reinvestment. I don't think there's anyone in the room who would disagree with those goals, but I think there's a lot of people who would acknowledge it's pretty complicated objectives to achieve those and a lot of things to take into consideration. And that's part of what we're going to walk through tonight, really looking at how we move those forward. The purpose of the EPI, we sort of asked ourselves when we started this exercise, why take this on and why do it now? And I guess we came really quickly to the conclusion that we can't afford not to do this. The current economic climate and the competitive resort climate, where we have our competition down in the US and around the world, really means that we need to stay on our best game and stay very vigilant in terms of economic planning. We had a great winter last year, followed by the best summer on record. This year started out really well, but at the same time, the world is changing. It's not the same Whistler that it was 10 years ago, and we need to be aware of that change and to adapt to it and embrace it. It's really, post-2010, it's a great opportunity for us to start looking at where we are and to do that in collaboration and what some have referred to as Whistler Inc. So I won't, just for the sake of time, run through these, just to touch on them. Some of the purpose, key economic trends, identify the key trends and challenges and opportunities, identify Whistler's economic goals and priorities, undertake that economic research that I've been talking about, conduct an analysis on that, and inform the community of the outcomes and involve them in the process of getting there, make recommendations on the RMI expenditures, which I'll talk about in a moment, and really the most important part, to collaborate on delivery of recommendations and the implementation plan. So, as the Mayor mentioned, the EPI Committee has been tasked by Council with providing recommendations on the expenditure of the RMI funds. I want to emphasize recommendation, make it clear that Council has retained full authority, and appropriately so, for any final decisions on RMI. It's really a tremendous tool for us in doing some economic planning, and we've had some great successes to date in using that funding. If you look at the Olympic Plaza, the skating rink that's going in this year, the festival events and animation that has been underway. At the same time, I think we need to be a little cautious about relying too much or relying on the RMI as sort of the wherewithal or the be-all, end-all, I guess, of how to do economic planning. It's really one component, and I think it would be a very incomplete approach to economic planning just to look at how do we spend RMI funding. We really need to get to a place where the initiatives we take on are self-sustaining, and this is just an extra. I did want to note the $34.5 million. We've signed an MOU with the Minister of Community Sport, the minister responsible of changing ministries down there. It's hard to keep track of him. Tourism, culture, and the arts. And that is, we do have a commitment for a 5-year funding arrangement that estimates out to around $34.5 million. But the actual funding and the receipt of that is contingent on each provincial budget. So each year we will know whether the legislature appropriates the funds for this program. So that means we can't go and spend $34 million in advance because we just don't have it. We'll find out each year whether we get it. We're pretty confident that we will, but we need to keep that in mind. So quickly on the economic partnership work to date, we've developed purposes, goals in terms of reference, and they've been approved by Council. Copies are in the back, and they're also on our website. We've reviewed Whistler's economic position in this past year in 11-12, discussed the gaps in the current economic data, and we've presented and discussed insights from the existing data that we have. And I can tell you we've had very lively discussions, really engaged group, lots of commitment to getting the good understanding. In terms of the last bullet related to the request for proposals, we've recognized that there is gaps in the information that we have, and so we put out a proposal for a economic sector analysis, which will look at, among other things, the regional versus destination tourist, tracking their spending patterns, looking at the value added of each sector of the resort and understanding their interrelationship. And I guess the other point to add, we're also looking at benchmarking, so comparing how we're doing to some other resorts and trying to understand that. And I want to note that the results of that study will be shared once we've completed the study. We're looking at 100 days from now, so likely around March of 2013. A couple of related initiatives. Just wanted to note these. We recognize that the EPI work is not being done in a vacuum and it's not a static environment that we're in. So we just have our official community plan with the provincial government right now for consideration and hopefully approval. We have the Learning and Education Task Force, which we anticipate reporting out in late winter. The Recreation and Leisure Advisory Committee, anticipate that coming back in spring of 2013, and the Culture Plan, which doesn't have a specific target right now, but anticipate that coming in a number of months. Not a bad thing to have these underway. They're all sort of interrelated and will inform us as we go forward. So our findings to date, we have some good data. What's really key in terms of good planning is a foundation of good data, and the jargon, or the saying, as the saying goes, junk in, junk out, in terms of doing economic or any analysis. So we really want to avoid that. What I'm going to present now is moving through some of the data headings that are identified here. I'm not going to get through, not going to get close to going through everything that we've looked at, but wanted to give you a sense of what we've covered and just sort of an idea of some of the data that we're looking at. So first of all, hopefully go through these quickly. Just some basic information. The red is the permanent residents. The yellow is the average daily visitor population. Blue is the seasonal workforce. So it hovers around 26,000 people, as a lot of you are aware. It's a very unique community. We have 10,000 population, but we really service 26,000 people. Part of the thinking behind the RMI funding was exactly that. A community of 10,000 people shouldn't be expected to provide the tax base and service a population of 26,000. Looking at employment and employment levels, and we use the term full-time equivalents. We have an estimated workforce about 12,000 persons. We use the term full-time equivalents, and just for everyone's understanding, if you have 2 people working half-time, we've counted that as 1 full-time equivalent, or FTE. The yellow line estimated the understaffed numbers, and as you can see in 2012, pretty much hit our targets in terms of numbers of required staffing and the number of people here. The unemployment rate, 2011, we're at 1%. It's worth noting that the federal and provincial unemployment rates hover at around 7%. So overall, our labor supply and demand are relatively balanced. Some economists think a healthy unemployment rate is really 1 or 2 or 3% even in terms of a healthy economy. Proportion of workforce living locally. Some more good news. Through the leadership of the Whistler Housing Authority, and perhaps many of the people in this room tonight, we are now at 82% of the workforce living locally. So of that 1,200 employees that I just talked about a moment ago, 9,600 of those, or 83%, currently live and are housed in Whistler. This is quite an achievement, and I understand an objective that the community has been pursuing for the better part of a decade. Looking at some commercial, just some information on commercial space distribution and taking that into account in terms of how we do planning. There's a lot of information clearly on this slide. If you look at the dark red and the large dark red and the yellow on your right-hand side, I guess, that's the food and restaurant is at 16% of the commercial space, and the retail is about 17%. So combined, those two make up about 33% or 1/3 of the space. This slide, which some of you may have seen before, I think is probably one of the one or two more critical slides to look at this evening, and is worth taking a moment to look at it. The yellow line shows our entire annual available room nights. The blue line represents the actual occupancy rate. So if you look at, we're hovering a little over 50% in terms of occupancy. Look to the far left, 4 or 5 bars out at about 1996, where the yellow starts. And then you can see how the gap has moved. If you move to the far right, it's 2011. So don't have any conclusions to offer on that, but when you look at it, I think it's a pretty important piece of information to take into account in doing economic planning and looking at how we move forward. Barrett, I believe, will be providing more information about visitation levels when she does her presentation. Some information about retail expenditure, size, and distribution. So we look at that. This is 2006 data, so a little bit dated. Most of the economic activities in the retail sector is from overnight visitors. That big chunk you see there is 77%. Full-time residents, the other piece there, the sort of yellowish color, have a potential to spend about 18% on the retail side, but with the leakage, meaning people going to Squamish and driving into Vancouver to go to Costco, they're really down at about 13%. So along with the previous slide on their occupancy rate and some visitor information, you can get some good idea of what's happening, get some good ideas about what's happening in the economy. This is another important slide, and it's courtesy of the Whistler Chamber of Commerce. It's a year 2000 baseline data. I want to direct your attention to 3 lines. The first one, the top black line, is the lease rate for businesses in Whistler, which you can see that has grown considerably over the last decade. So 2000 on your left-hand side and then moving up to 2011. Interestingly, the light green line, which is the commercial tax increase, the actual taxation of business in Whistler is lower and has decreased over time than the consumer price index for the same period. So that sort of shows you what the costs of doing business here. In a lot of communities, you hear about Class 6 business being a major issue in terms of the taxation rate. This one you can see in terms of, it's still an issue, I would imagine, for a lot of businesses, but you can see some of the bigger drivers there in terms of costs. So we're also spending a fair bit of time looking at real estate, not really touching much on it right here. Just to note, we are looking at real estate performance over the last 15 years. The red line is the annual real estate sales values. The yellow graph is the total number of real estate sales. So for example, in 2011, the red line shows a total value of $365 million in sales and 550 transactions. So we're looking at other changes as well in terms of, the breakout condos, townhomes, et cetera. But this information just gives you a sense of what the market has been doing over that period. This slide, the community growth, many of you may be familiar with this, shows the proportion of the remaining undeveloped bed units. Total bed units, 61,263, which is the gray right on the end of 2010. The blue is the total built units at just over 53,000, and the gray is yet to be built but approved, and its allocation around 8,175. So That's a really quick run through and a lot of information for you to digest. This is going to be, this presentation is being recorded if I've buzzed through it too fast. Before I turn it over to Barrett, I'd just like to go back and reiterate that we are very much committed to sharing information out of the economic planning work, and we will be back to talk to you again in the near future. So over to you, Barrett.
So I'm going to give a little overview on some of the stats. All of the partners, as you saw in Mike's presentation and others that you won't have seen, participated in data, but because Tourism Whistler is responsible for the tourism piece and our research department provided quite a wealth of information, which I'm only going to provide some highlights of tonight. But I think it gives some context to some of the basis of what we have today. So this is really just giving you a snapshot of our visitor volume. And it's interesting because you hear different comments quoted throughout the resort with regards to, do we have more visitors in summer, more in winter? And it gets a little bit confusing. So for clarification, we put all three on one slide. In fact, we have more summer visitors than we have winter visitors, as you can see there. But what it is that they're either day visitors or they're coming for shorter lengths of stay. So you can see that the room nights in winter time are much higher, as well as the revenues, the in-resort expenditures are much higher. Paul, are you going to give me a run for my money up here?
No. You have visitor days. These are individuals.
Those are, yes, those are actual individual unique visitors.
Irrespective of length of stay.
Correct. And yes, I could provide you with that, but I don't have that here today.
Okay, all right. That's sort of the key metric.
Behave yourself.
Per person per day.
But I think, as I say, that I think people think that we actually have more visitors in winter, but we actually have more visitors in summer. But it is, to your point, the visitor days, but I have lots more data to come, so I'll get into that. So looking, again, just focusing on unique visitors, that just gives you a sense from November to April and May to October of what those unique visitors look like. But then translate that into room nights, and you can see suddenly that that curve in winter is far greater. And then just, I'm going to really buzz through this because it's just really highlights. So moving on to how our visitors break out destination versus regional. In winter time, you can see it's close to 60%. So you've got kind of a 60-40 split there. If I had provided you the summer data from last year, you would have seen almost the identical but upside down, with about 60% regional in summer and about 40% destination. Happy to report, though, this past summer, we have actually grown our international traffic. Interestingly, not so much from the US market, although we've seen some growth there in small pieces, but we've actually seen growth from our Australia market, we've seen growth from the UK market, and from some of our Asian markets. So we're starting to see that shift there. And this gives you a snapshot when you look at winter on the left and summer on the right. You can see how our markets break up. We are still more regionally driven in summer, and so you can see again that that British Columbia market is close to the 50% mark, but then you can also see how summer continues to grow internationally, which is very promising, following winter's lead. Okay, so moving on to average occupancies. And what this slide is trying to show is that if you look at the Friday, Saturday weekend period, in winter we're at an average of 77% occupancy, in summer at an average of 64% occupancy. Whereas if you look at that Sunday to Thursday period, you'll suddenly see that it drops. And in winter, stronger at 54% average, but in summertime where we're more regionally driven, those shorter stays, you can see that we've got room for growth there. So moving on to traveler types, this just gives you a snapshot of the types of visitors that we have. So in wintertime, 68% of our visitors would be what we refer to as that individual traveler. And that would be your skiers and snowboarders and individuals who are coming and they've planned their own vacation, whereas the 21% would have booked through a tour operator, and those are primarily from our international markets, and then the 11% would be from conferences and groups. And there's a little triangle in there that just showed in 2010 the VANOC rooms, which was a boost for that 1 year. So then moving on to summer, you can see similar proportions, but 65% would be our individual traveler in summertime, 22% of tour and travel, which is a little lower than in winter, and then in the 13% is lower than in winter, and then conference and group is higher in summer than it is in winter at 22%. I threw this slide in just because I think it's a really interesting slide. This is only showing meetings and incentive business. But you can see that red line, which represents corporations, that massive drop. That really was a reflection of external factors when corporations chose not to travel. And so just threw that in there because you can see there are certain elements that are outside of our control, and then there are clearly a number that are within our control. So that's a real snapshot of the present. Looking to the past, just wanted to show the progression, and you can see, through the 90s up to the millennium, clearly Whistler was in this growth phase, and we were seeing, continued growth on an annual basis. When you look to we get to the decade of the millennium, it is when we start to see a little bit more of that roller coaster. And so just wanted to throw in there some of the context around that. When you see that, the Canada's economy was incredibly strong. When you look at, the U.S., it was the longest period of growth in American history. When you look at what the cost of oil was per barrel, it was $17 a barrel, meaning that flights and car traffic, et cetera, was much more reasonably priced. And then clearly when you look at things like exchange rate, the US dollar, it peaked, in the early millennium, but in many cases it was at a 40% advantage. Then of course you see the red, when you get into the millennium, and it's everything from 9/11 to the recession that hit in the U.S. to SARS. You can see oil hits a $60 a barrel level, and that's when we start to see increasing in flights and car travel. You can see the U.S. Canadian dollar is at parity at a certain point there, and all of the other issues, including, of course, the global financial meltdown in 2008. Then you can see the Olympic Games, which certainly gave us a boost, really in the middle of an economic recession. We were one of the few destinations that saw the uprise in the 2009-10 period due to our unique competitive advantage. And then certainly we had an amazing snow advantage last year, which we're in fact experiencing at the moment as well, I'm happy to report. And then, of course, all of the positive things that really have been happening internationally when you look at the impact from the Olympic Games, awareness that was starting to grow, and getting that feedback from markets like the UK, Germany, Australia, looking at post-Olympic investment made by both Whistler Blackcomb and Tourism Whistler, unique marketing initiatives such as the Whistler Sabbatical Project, a resort-wide effort through the Hotel Association and Whistler Blackcomb and Tourism Whistler about a book-buy strategy to get more and more of our international markets and national markets to be booking early. And so all of these things start to collect into some positive. So that's just really the summation slide. The one piece that I didn't note was back in the middle 1990s is when we did start to see the Japanese economy start to decline, and that was just another piece that really has gone on for 2 decades now, and where we're really just a shadow of what that market was. But in turn, we have seen growth coming from the UK, from Australia, from Mexico, etc. And then just wanted to put it in context with currencies. When you look at, this is really looking at ADR, which is average daily rate, from a hotel perspective. The top line, the trend line, the orange, is really showing what our average daily rate is from a hotel perspective from 1999-2000 up to the present. And so in Canadian dollars, you can see the rate that we charge is on a downward trend line. But if you put it into context of how our customers see it, so you put that into American currency, or you put that into the UK pound, and what you see is that from our customers' perspective, outside of Canada, the trend line is actually going up, meaning that they are seeing, even though we are dropping prices, they are seeing the expense of a Whistler vacation continuing to increase. And so that slide is just really to give some perspective that, you know, we see rising costs and decreasing pricing and thereby a deteriorating bottom line, but our guests actually see an increase in price. So these are the challenges that we're up against when currencies are no longer buoying our competitive advantage as they were earlier in the decade. Okay, I just wanted to put one slide in here that just really gave some perspective of what are some of the things that Tourism Whistler is doing. So I'm really not going to get into it as much as to say these are some of the priorities that Tourism Whistler specifically within our business plan have identified. You know, clearly it's around removing barriers to travel, and that's everything. We've been doing work on whether it's Mexican visas, whether it is air access, whether it is cross-border crossings. There's a number of issues that we've been working on, but that will always continue to be a priority because if our guests can't get here, then we can do all the marketing in the world. Certainly growing destination markets, it's about our long-haul markets, long-haul US, and our overseas markets, but it's also about growing our emerging markets. And this is critical because Whistler is built on a platform that cannot rely only on the regional markets. It's certainly about attracting large conference groups. It's about attracting large events, and certainly in partnership with the RMOW, with all of our resort partners. It's about producing innovative marketing campaigns, and it's about increasing our funding. I just give that context because there are pieces that Tourism Whistler will work on an annual basis in trying to grow our tourism economy, but there is this bigger piece as far as how do we collectively work together. And so I would say that we are, as Tourism Whistler, excited and delighted to be part of the EPI, the Economic Partnership Initiative, moving forward and looking at what are those great opportunities that we can advance collectively that will take us from where we are today to that next level. Thank you very much.
My name is Jason Faulkner, and I'm the council representative on the EPI committee. And so I'll just do a little bit of a wrap-up here before we do our breakout. And as a council representative, I'd like to restate that when council decided to set up this EPI committee, it's part of what is a cornerstone and has been a cornerstone of our decision-making, which is really based on informed, reasoned, and coordinated economic planning, but based on information, and really good information. When we looked at the short data trends that Mike presented and also Barrett presented, and there's been a lot of that, a lot more of that information, as Mike referred to, that's come to the EPI. What we identified pretty quickly is that we had some pretty big gaps in the knowledge. As much as we have a lot of very, very good data and some very good information about our external environment and how we're doing, you know, the cost trends and that sort of thing as far as the tourism side goes. Where we saw some significant gaps in our knowledge was, as Mike referred to, as Whistler Inc. And that was really the community and the business community and the various components of that business community, and really how those different components interact, what are the real drivers there, and really in a bigger context, what are the implications of either the past, present, and what we think might happen in the future with those different components. Because if we're looking at getting the biggest bang for our buck on some of those on the RMI funds, et cetera, we really need to make some of those decisions with the best possible information we have to get the biggest bang for those and identify potentially some opportunities and trends and so on. And we really felt that we didn't have the best information that we could to get the biggest bang for the buck. Personally, so far it's been a really interesting process. As Mike indicated, we've got a real divergent group of thinkers at the table, and a lot of people with a tremendous amount of experience, both in the historical perspective of how the resort has gotten to where it's at, but also each coming from a different sector, and therefore a different point of view about what's got us to where we are, what's giving us our success, but also what some of our weaknesses might be, and some of the concerns that those different sectors have. So tonight is the first of 2 or 3 public engagements that we're planning as part of the EPI. Tonight is also, we're really here in a listening capacity, and through the broader conversations with the municipal budget and so on, we'll be engaging the community as much as we possibly can for feedback as we discover through this process some more information and ideas and so on and so forth. So we are here to listen. We're not here to present answers. It's very early stage on this process, or to make any recommendations, that sort of thing. We're really in a compiling and listening status right now. The recommendations and the thoughts and ideas and stuff will come later once we get our data house in order. So we really thought it was a good time to share tonight and get some thoughts and ideas from folks generally over the conversation tonight. So on behalf of the EPI, we're looking forward to the rest of the evening and look forward to the future engagements around this planning process. And thanks you very much for joining us tonight.